Hi all, welcome back, and today's discussion is about apoptosis. So, what is apoptosis? It is a programmed cell death pathway. So, it is defined as a pathway of cell death in which cells activate enzymes that degrade the cell's own molecular DNA and nuclear and cytoplasmic proteins. So, this apoptosis has some features like over here the suicide pathway is activated, there is cell death occurring, and it will never cause any inflammation or collateral tissue damage. Now, let's look on to the causes of apoptosis. The causes of apoptosis include the physiologic processes and the pathologic processes. Under physiology, you will have organized cell destruction, normal cell destruction, and involution of cells in hormone-dependent tissues. There are several other causes also. Under pathologic, you have cell death in tumors, cell death in cytotoxic cells, pathologic atrophy, and degenerative diseases of CNS. Coming to the mechanism of action. The mechanism of action of apoptosis basically involves three steps: initiation, execution, and phagocytosis. So, this mechanism is regulated by biochemical pathways that control the balance of death signal and pro-survival inducing signals, and which ultimately activates the enzyme. In the initiation phase, you have two pathways, your intrinsic pathway and your extrinsic pathway. Let me talk about the intrinsic pathway. In intrinsic pathway, mitochondrial damage takes place. This in turn increases the mitochondrial permeability. This is the major mechanism of intrinsic pathway. So basically, mitochondria contains different proteins which are capable of inducing apoptosis. One such protein is cytochrome C. As I have already mentioned here, the major mechanism is mitochondrial damage that increases the mitochondrial permeability. This permeability is controlled by 20 proteins. Its prototype is BCL2, and what happens here is when the proteins leak into the cytoplasm, there is activation of the enzyme caspase 9. Let's move on to the extrinsic pathway. The major mechanism here is inhibition by extracellular signals. Therefore, the ligand gate receptors serves as initiators and initiates this pathway. Death receptors are the major express molecules that triggers apoptosis. Most of these are the members of the tumor necrosis factor receptor family. Their cytoplasmic region will contain a domain which is named as death domain. The extrinsic pathway mainly happens through this death domain. So, let's look on to the flowchart now. In the initiation phase, there are two pathways, mitochondrial pathway and the death receptor pathway. In the mitochondrial pathway, cell injury happens and the BCL2 family receptors get activated. This in turn activates the pro-apoptic effectors which get dimerized, and then it gets inserted into the mitochondrial membrane and forms channels. Here, cytochrome C and other mitochondrial proteins escape into the cytosol and activates caspase 9. So, coming to the death receptor pathway, the receptors get binded to the ligand. The molecules of the receptors gets cross-linked with the ligand. It binds to the adaptive proteins via the death domain and recruits it and finally activates caspase 8. So, as I said initially, the initiation phase activates two enzymes, caspase 9 and caspase 8. This is the end result of the initiation phase. Coming to the execution phase. Initiator caspases, caspase 9 and caspase 8, which was produced in the initiation phase, together activates another series of caspases called the executioner caspases, caspase 3 and caspase 6. This in turn mediates the final phase of apoptosis. The end result of this will be nuclear fragmentation. Coming to the phagocytosis, the last step in the mechanism of apoptosis. During phagocytosis, there will be clearance of apoptotic cells. This process is so efficient that the dead cells disappear within minutes. Coming to the execution phase, as I said, caspase 9 and caspase 8, which was activated in the initiation phase, together executes and activates the executionary caspases caspase 3 and caspase 6, which in turn acts on many cellular components and either activates endonuclease or breaks down the exoskeleton. Thus, nuclear fragmentation happens and formation of apoptotic cells happens. Finally, there is clearance of apoptotic cells in the phagocytosis step. We have completed our discussion on the topic apoptosis. Let's have a quick recap. Apoptosis is nothing but a programmed cell death. It involves 3 stages: initiation, execution, and phagocytosis. In initiation, there are 2 pathways, intrinsic and extrinsic pathway. The end result of these 2 pathways will be activation of caspase 8 and caspase 9. These caspases in turn executes and activates the executionary caspases caspase 6 and caspase 3 in the execution phase. Finally, there is clearance of apoptotic cells in the phagocytosis phase. This is all about apoptosis. So, if you like our video, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe.